person watching before we get going. So, hello everybody. If you're coming in now, you're seeing just the beginning of Donato and I getting ready to have a talk on topics that relate to the brain especially, but we're going to talk about laterality of the eye and hand, the preference of foot and hip and spin preference in the body, the difference between fine motor and gross motor skills and how does that apply to different players, doing how to train the brain for better performance, and then finally we'll finish off with balance. And so anyway, waiting for one person to start watching so that we can have the satisfaction of having a live audience. But if we don't get that in about 20 seconds, then I'm going to start with the introductions. And I'm also trying a new thing where I'm standing instead of sitting. So I'll try to stand as still as I can. Let's see how that goes. Anyway, all right. So now we're gonna kick off here. Hi, my name is Bill Patton with BrainSports.coach, and I'm here with Donato Camagnoli, and we are going to be discussing brain research that centers around the laterality of your eyes and hands. So, maybe you've heard the terms cross-dextral and pure dextral, so we're going to dive into that. We're also going to get into the preference of which foot is your dominant foot. We're going to talk about hips and also especially spin preference and how does that play a role in how players develop. We're going to move on to fine motor versus gross motor, and I have an interesting story to tell about a particular player. And then we're also going to get into balance, because all of these things affect a player's balance. And sometimes there are conventional wisdoms that coaches use that maybe are not the most efficient way to teach, or maybe they fight against the natural talent of a player. So we're going to dive into those things. And we're also going to do this. We're going to try to come up with what's a good takeaway for an elite level player. What's a good takeaway for an up-and-coming challenging player or a serious recreational player? And then also, what are the implications for a brand new learner to the sport? So now, after all that, Donato, if you would be so kind as to introduce yourself and what are your current roles that you're playing in the tennis world?
So hi, everybody, and thank you very much, Bill, for inviting me to this wonderful event. In the last few years, let's say since 2013, I have been working on behalf of the Italian Tennis Federation as a technical advisor, and I was in charge at the same time of developing international partners. So what I did is actually to attend conferences all over the world, develop exchanges with other federations, and keep in touch with colleagues of mine working for coaches education all over the world. So thank you very much, Bill, for the invitation.
Awesome. No, and this is actually our second conversation. So as Donato and I were getting to know each other, we had a pretty lengthy talk, and I think we're very like-minded about a lot of things, and that's exciting to me, but I also think that there's a lot that we can learn from each other. And so then I'm excited I have no idea how this is going to turn out, but I do know that there's going to be some information here that's going to be quite helpful to anyone who wants to learn how to play tennis or coach tennis better. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about laterality. Laterality meaning essentially having to do with the dominance of body parts. So, I think everybody knows they have a dominant hand, right? And then fewer people know that they have a dominant eye. But where do we start with dominant eye dominance for the hand and the eye when it comes to elite level players?
Yeah, Many years ago already, so we are talking about 15, almost 20 years ago, Italian Tennis Federation, we started a few experiments. So we wanted to have the full control of a bunch of kids. Uh, those kids were probably the best under 10 and under players that we had, boys and girls, in Italy. And we started introducing these studies about naturalities because we were very much interested in knowing whether that one girl or that one boy had a left eye dominance or a right eye dominance in order to understand once they fully developed these kids, boys and girls, if they could actually represent the model of performance, because we believed that at those times that the majority of the players, so we are talking about around 2000 and 2005, so already 15 years ago. So we believe that the top players were what we call cross. So either um, uh, right hand and left eye, or reverse, left hand and right eye. So
Yes.
we wanted to know actually whether these kids were capable to reach the highest level possible, like 10 or 15 years later. And we did this massive research on these kids, and we discovered that actually we had a very, very large representation of good kids. So probably the best ones in Italy were with these characteristics. So cross Dextro situations.
Yes.
And
Let me break in for a moment because at some point somebody referenced a study to me, and they mentioned that it seemed as though cross dextral people learned tennis and excelled at tennis more often, and it could be that study that you did that they were referencing. I don't know exactly who that was, but one of the things that I think is really important is that there are some outliers. I do believe that Andre Agassi and Serena Williams are both pure dextral players. So I think the issue that I see from an elite standpoint is that if we train pure dextral players properly, that they can excel to the same levels as the cross dextral. Um, so do you have anything more to say on that before we move on to kind of the recreational and what are the practical tips?
yeah, yes, yeah, Bill, yeah, thank you. So we assumed, so we didn't exclude that players could reach the highest level of qualification in this sport being pure practical. We just assumed that the majority of these top players in both, let's say genders, men and women, um, would be the majority of them would be cross anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So minority of them pure dextral, and the majority of them. And so we wanted to investigate the reasons of these assumptions, given that, of course, we had some evidence because we had people working with these top players who were at that time consultants for the federation as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we had some, let's say, evidence. It was a data-driven experience and experiment. So our goal was to know about the state of the art and to know about the rule of the chicken or the egg. So is
Mm.
it the coaching of tennis modeling the growth of these kids so that the best players are cross, or are these cross dextral players playing better tennis than the others because they have these kind of characteristics? So that was
Yes.
the kind of questioning, the kind of questions that we were asking to ourselves. And
Yes, and
it's very,
yeah,
yeah, no, just to transfer all this to an advanced player, we came to a few conclusions.
okay,
Un- Unfortunately, it's not science. So I'm not talking about rocket science, even if it was a data-driven experience. But
yeah,
anyway, what we did at that time was it was just a trial, if you want, to categorize the way of teaching. So we went to the conclusion that sometimes if you have those characteristics, so you are poor Dextro, you have to insist on this, and this. And then if you are cross, instead, you have to insist on that and that and that.
mm-hmm,
So we made charts. Of course, these charts were made in order to be contradicted, in order to bring on the table, to bring into the discussion something different. And for the advanced player, just to answer your question, we came to the conclusion that visual acuity is very important for tennis.
mm-hmm,
As, as a matter of fact, um, if you don't look at the ball, if you don't see the ball, then the brain is not able to track the projectors, so the object coming to you. So if there is no information from the brain, so the brain cannot interpret reality, so the flow of information, and cannot translate that flow into specific movement. So to make it simple, very simple, if there is an advanced player or if there is a beginner, very important that he looks at the ball
mm-hmm.
coming on, let's say coming to his or her court. And then, of course, there are a few, let's say, things that the player can do in order to better track the ball and provide more information to the brain.
Yes. So for me, and this, my data is all my personal experience. So I've probably since coming to this theory, I've tested this out on maybe a couple of hundred players, maybe close to 200 players, and found that approximately half the players that I'm meeting are pure dextral, and the other half are cross dextral. And the problem with pure dextral is that we're not teaching those people very well, because what we do is we use Federer as our example of, oh, look at how his eyes are right on contact with his head relatively still. But if we look at an Andre Agassi or a Serena Williams, what we actually see are their eyes looking ahead of contact. And my pet theory is that they are pure dextral. And so what I've been doing with these almost 200 players is teaching pure dextral players to focus on a place halfway between the bounce and the contact point. So their focal point is forward, and then they're using their peripheral vision actually to track the ball into that last moment into the frame. And of course, you can't see the ball in the racket for that moment. It happens too fast. But you can see it come in and you can see it go out. Those can happen. So in teaching that to some of my players, that's been a revelation. All of a sudden now they're playing well. So with my higher level players, they're making fewer mistakes. With my, weekend warrior, good recreational players, the amount of errors that they make is dramatically reduced. And then also, I'm able to teach almost 100% of the people who come to me for the first time how to play the game competently. And I say almost 100% because, there are still people who, by virtue of their athleticism or lack thereof, or their eyesight or what have you, some factor, they're just not really cut out to be a tennis player. So, I don't presume to be able to teach every single person to be able to play the game. So, is there any more to talk about in terms of the laterality of the eye and hand, or should we move on to the
I
foot,
just
hip, and spin? Yeah.
Bill, I just wanted to add a couple of things. We had so actually I we developed on behalf of the federation a paper, let's say a piece of paper where all the drills were reported in order to assess these lateralities, not only on kids, but that was the, let's say, the standard protocol. Okay, so there was drills for the rotation of the hips, the other drills for the rotation of the shoulders, other
Mm-hmm.
other drills for determining whether you were kicking with the left foot or the right foot. So all this stuff, and it was a data-driven experience because I did that. What was called the laterality test, and we did it uh, extensively for a few years, about 900 people. So I collected over the years around 900 tests.
Mm-hmm.
The cross the cross Dextro people were not even 15%.
Hmm.
Yeah, but these 15%, let's say, of people, so this data was influenced by the fact that I gathered all these, let's say, information, all these tests, but samples were distributed in level of play. So
Mm-hmm.
these people were not, let's say, everybody was not top players. So these samples started from the very beginner of this game to the top 30, top 20 in the world. So
Mm-hmm.
this population, these demographics was not centered on high level of qualification of the game. And yeah, I can confirm that given that the impact lasts too short because it's 3-4 milliseconds, so we came to the conclusions that sometimes the way you teach makes the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the case you as a coach, in the case of for example of a kid or of an adult as a beginner of the game, and you put him, for example, in a close stance position or even a semi-closed position. So, in other words, with his left foot, if the guy or the girl is right-handed, with the left foot let's say behind the level of the shoulders in order to be closed, then I don't know, probably because of the competency of this player or the skills. So very little skills. Uh, we actually we saw a very high probability of not hitting the ball because as you know, these close stances, especially for those not competent players, they will influence the position of the shoulders and of the head as well, which probably implies a not correct visual acuity on the end of the player. So if the player, to make it simple, doesn't see the ball, very likely that it doesn't hit the ball. So very, let's say, very simple conclusions, of course, to be applied to beginner players. But this was, according to my experience, what I
Mm-hmm.
read over the years. And
Yeah.
of course, experience makes a difference because one thing is to collect data, and one thing is to then take your hands and make them dirty when you go on court and you try to actually understand why this and that naturality test say this or that.
Yeah, no, that's really great because yeah, we need to have a high level of humility about doing research because it's amazing that you've done this observational study where you simply categorized what is right, and then you can look at how did these players develop, and then kind of in a longitudinal way start to make some discoveries. But it takes a lot of time. The thing that's interesting to me about what you said was a mentor of mine who recently passed, Don Henson, who's very much studied the brain and was inspirational to me in that regard. He would talk about how teaching in a neutral stance, essentially 90 degrees to the net with the feet, the body almost completely side to the net, that then the rotation that came from that did something in the brain that created what he called polylateral motion, and that for whatever reason creates more connections in the brain, and then everything gets easier than when you move to a slightly open stance. Now, of course, a truly closed stance is rarely a good idea, but we do still see those being used in emergency situations when a player, desperately has to reach out wide to get a ball. So, I mean, there is a place for that, but it's just not something that I would teach. I do teach players to have their side to the net almost completely at the beginning of learning to play for that reason. And then, in short order, then we open them up for a slightly more open stance. At this pace, we've dug so deeply into the first and just barely beginning to touch on the second one. I don't think we're going to be able to get to all 5 of those topics today because, frankly, I know I don't have enough energy right now to go ahead and talk for an entire hour. So, but now I just wanted to share a kind of a personal story about the foot, the hip, the spin preference, because I have a preference to be on my left foot. I'm dominant with my left foot. And so that meant, and then also I have a clockwise spin preference. So that made hitting a forehand very difficult for me because I would have to be on my front foot, and then I was also, not rotating very smoothly that way. But my backhand was better. But the problem was coaches kept telling me, you're hitting off your back foot. Stop hitting off your back foot. So I would try to get onto my front foot, and then my stroke was not that great. I had more difficulty. So I've learned now that I really do want to rotate mainly from my left foot, and that it's taken time to learn to rotate counterclockwise and feel comfortable with that. So I think part of what I want to bring up is the idea that we have predispositions to a certain thing, but then also in training, we need to be able to balance them out and learn the thing that we're not comfortable with. So why don't you take that away? So
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing, Bill, so if it's possible, because talking about semi-close or close stances, this was not the way we used to teach tennis for beginners, because for beginners especially, we use neutral stances, as you said. But at that time, so 15, 20 years ago, there were still coaches teaching tennis with, so let's say, the same way as we used to do in the 70s or in the 80s. So there's, I don't know if you had the same thing in the States, but actually in Europe, the whole teaching, the entire teaching in the 70s and in the 80s turned around of teaching tennis with these closed stances, which were not anymore the case 30 years ago, but still in the 70s and the 80s, that was the case. And one of the things we wanted to investigate, as far as you remembered 2 minutes ago, was the capability of the body to rotate. So, as you said, to spin. And there are many ways you can rotate your body. You can rotate with your hips, you can rotate with your shoulders, and then don't forget that every time you hit the ball, you have to reach that ball. So I do hope you, as a player, you can have 2 feet and 2 legs, and then you will soon discover that with one foot you kick the ball, and the other one you probably never kick the ball or a soccer ball in your life. And then you discover that there are other distinctions for that. So talking about the lower limbs, you have legs, and then you can notice that there is a leg of preference, which doesn't correspond to the foot. Okay, and then probably there is a neurological correspondence. So the brain, in a way or in another way, trusts more one leg than the other one. So, having said that, you have different spins in your body, and you have a right foot or a left foot as a dominant foot, and then you have a right or left dominant leg. So, this combination of things, this combination of lateralities, how can this combination affect the way you play tennis? Or you learn, or as a reverse engineering operation, you teach tennis. Because, as a matter of fact, whether you are left eye dominated or right eye dominated, you see the world from a different perspective. And then you have a different peripheral eye. So we assumed that, given at that time the serve and the forehand were two weapons, or started to be two big weapons of the modern game. So if you rotate more with your shoulders, then you would store more energy in order to produce a different stroke, let's say mechanics, a different stroke production. So, and what we wanted to do is take this topic of the lateralities in conjunctions with other investigations that we have been doing during those years. And for this reason, we called people like very famous biomechanists like Bruce Elliott, and actually collaborated with the federation like for 5 years. We called Richard Smith from UCLA, from Los Angeles. And I had the privilege to stay with them for a few weeks every year, given that I was a translator. And actually, what we did with the former director of the coaches education is to travel around and across Italy in order to spread the word, because everything that was introduced into the country should have been anyway distributed as a knowledge, as a competency to all the Italian coaches. That was our, let's say, philosophy. And yes, we discovered that actually stroke production, combining lateralities, biomechanics, and even the ABCs of technique, and of course, the way you are built from your birth, and the way you grow, and the way you develop, influence very much the way you play tennis.
Yes. So
I'm gonna provide you a very simple example. Okay.
Okay.
As you know, the people we are living in is made for as a tendency for people who are right hand dominated. So the way you rotate, for example, if you want to open the door, you have to rotate from right to left if you are right hand dominated. And this is not a word for leftists, or this is not a word for the ones who spin the other way around from
Mm-hmm.
left to right. But as a matter of fact, if you are right hand dominated and the forehand is a weapon in our modern tennis, then of course if you rotate from left to right, then you can store and produce more energy compared to the other side. So of course there are lots of speculations that you can make, but what
Mm-hmm.
we wanted to do is to collect as many, let's say, evidences as possible, as much information and data as possible, in order for us to have much clearer idea than the past.
Yes. So I want to wrap up here in a moment, but I wanted to tell a story about a particular player that I was working with, and then also use Andre Medvedev as an example of why people need to open their minds. So I had this girl, and she was playing right-handed, and I was very interested in laterality, so I tested all of my players. And much to my surprise, she actually turned out to be fine motor right-handed, but gross motor left-handed. So the problem there was that she was already 12 years old. She was already playing competitively. And, I looked at, what was her stroke mechanics from her forehand going this way and her two-handed backhand going that way. And we tried briefly to test out having her play left-handed, but between her parents and I and her, we decided that she should continue to start to play right-handed. And it was mostly because of the threat of injury, because so much of her musculature and brain training had been to produce that it wasn't worth the short-term reduction in ability, and it wasn't worth the risk of maybe having some kind of core level injury that might take a long time to recover from, or maybe never recover from. So the risk was too great to have her switch to actually play to favor her dominant side. And then the other example is, I think Andre Medvedev is an amazing case history because he has extremely unique style of play. But my pet theory is that it has to do with the way he's wired, and that he plays in a way that suits his unique predispositions. But then, to counter to that, then it's turning out that the brain is much more plastic than people have ever said before. So there's, I do believe if he wanted to, create strokes that looked, very conventional, he could. But there would be a fighting against the predispositions that he has, that in order to make that happen. So yeah, it's interesting because now the top researchers are now saying that the brain is soft wired, not hardwired. So, do you have any comments about either of those?
About motor skill development and motor skill learning, I noticed that we have to be very careful with kids, especially because laterality, of course, it's not science. It's a topic we should develop. So to dive into and to have people working more and better on that. But it's something very, very relevant and very powerful if combined with tennis. Because and we did a big effort in order to study and investigate in all that. To be more clear, we did that test on many hundreds, so lots of kids, and we discovered that many kids already at the age of 10, 11 had developed lower limbs, so legs, in a different way. So even at the age of 11, so pre-puberal, if you want,
Mm-hmm.
the way the right leg compared to the left one and reverse was
Hmm.
developing was completely different. And
Wow.
yeah, and one of the explanation, and probably this should be more connected with the next topic, was due to the specificity of training and,
Hmm.
and of coaching. So kids uh, used or wanted, let's say, used to have more um, utilization of, let's say, of one leg compared to the other one due to loading, so to the production of energy. And this put the entire body of these kids in complete unbalance from a structural point of view. Because, as I said before, if you want to hit the ball, you have to reach that ball, you have to run towards the ball, and you have to place your body on the space, on a three-dimensional space, with the right, let's say, setups. But over time, with thousands and millions of repetitions, then the brain reinforces those structures that are already strong in the brain and neglects, as a matter of fact, and as a consequence, those structures that are already weak in the brain. So, what should we do in that case? Of course, we should have talked with the coach, first of all, who was responsible of these kids, and talk with the physical trainer, because physical trainers and coaches, they should work hand in hand within the club, which is a typical European, let's say, framework. Okay, but all of a sudden it was a red light, and that red light was very, very dangerous. So please stop looking at the fact that if you play tennis, then you're going to have a stronger arm and a stronger hand. Probably problems they are coming from other parts of your body, and,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
they are coming out from what probably matters most, which are your legs and your feet. So please watch out. Instead of talking of imbalances of your upper body, take into consideration that probably you're going to have imbalances here because you are unbalanced down under, or
Yeah.
in
That's great. No, that's
the lower part of your body.
right. Yeah, because now all the Aussies are thinking that you're talking about Australia when you say down under.
Yeah, no,
So
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So all right, I want to finish with this because I really do need to wrap this up. But I clearly we're going to have to do this again because there's so much more to talk about. But there's a there's a woman, Dr. Cheryl Calder, who's one of the top visual experts in the world, and she says that children need to be able to have these multivariate experiences of climbing trees, climbing fences, crawling around under things, balancing on narrow ledges, because that brings about much greater, wider variety of visual skills. And then also, a number of years ago, this was quoted, I forget where, but the Italian Soccer Federation did a study of catastrophic knee injuries, and they found that children who had balance training early to get, very well balanced between both legs were far less likely to have a catastrophic injury, of a torn ACL or, meniscus tear or what have you. So I think the couple of practical things that I would like to see people take from this talk is A, understand how you are unique or how your players are unique. What's their preference? Two, build their confidence along those lines. But then, if someone's going to be is really has high aspirations, then work to balance them. Work to get them to do the thing that is counter to what is comfortable for them. So as I, later developed a decent forehand, I had to learn how to spin counter preference. Oops. And but these things have to be measured, because you don't want to destroy somebody's confidence by working too early to get them to do the thing that's uncomfortable. And then finally, just understanding that the combination of eye dominance and hand dominance could mean a completely different way of seeing the ball, and understanding what those are, because you can't just say do it like Federer, because that's not going to work with everyone. Some people need to be looking farther ahead. So those are things that I would like there to be for people to take away. So do you have 2 or 3 things that you would like to drive home? Can you hear me?
Are you talking to me?
Yes. So are there a couple of quick points, 2 or 3 points that you would want someone watching this to really take home?
Yeah, just continue on the chapter about balance. Balance is really key in our sport, but in everything. So balance starts from your feet, and balance starts from your legs. And as a matter of fact, it can be kind of an accident, if you want, that our Yannick Sinner, whom you probably know because he's top 10 in the world, 20 years old of age, he's an example of balance, and not because he has been working on that since 2015, since he was enrolled at the Piatti Center Academy, but because at the age of 11, 12, he was runner-up in skiing as an Italian, so he was second at the Italian championship. So, and as a matter of fact, he comes like Andrea Seppi, who was top 20 in the world a few years ago. They both come from the same region, from what we call from the same province, and so it's more famous, that province, not for producing tennis players, but for producing skiers. And and so they live in the middle of the mountains. Temperature, it's freezing over there, and these kids, they collect so much information in their brain because they do gather so many experiences like climbing and running, and then skiing, and then using bobsleds, and then
Right.
so whatever, and then another great, fantastic source of information and knowledge and competency for the brain is, for example, hockey. So hockey, of course, in Italy, even South Tyrol, is not that developed as in Canada or in the States. But anyway, is another discipline, a winter sport that you practice over there. So you play this, you play that, you climb, you run, you're exposed to the environment, then your brain is very, very strong.
Yes.
All of a
Awesome.
sudden, it's very strong.
Yes. Okay. So, all right. Very good. I really appreciate your time, and I can't wait to do this again with you sometime. Maybe we'll be able to do this before the end of the year. But I'm happy that we could talk, and I hope that people got some practical information out of this. And thank you again, Donato, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you.
All right. All right. Thank you.
Thank
All right.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.